Good afternoon, everyone. This is Shane Doyle with Central Data. Thank you for joining us today. Excited to welcome Phocas, a good partner to Central Data. They're going to be walking through a few slides and a discussion around how to streamline the M&A process using Phocas as a platform. I'm going to pass it over to Christine and we'll get going.
Fantastic. So some housekeeping notes. All the participants are muted. There's a Q&A panel. If you've got any questions, please feel free to put your questions in there. We'll answer those towards the end of the presentation. We are recording this and it will be available to everybody once they're done, once the session is over. So today we're talking about streamlining your mergers and acquisition process with Phocas. I am Christine Martin. I am the Partner Alliance Manager for Phocas, and I want to thank our friends and partners at Central Data for allowing us to present this. With me, I have Nick Aversano. Nick, it's kind of like a hair club for men commercial for me because Nick used to be one of our customers and then he jumped over to our side and he works with us. So he's got this firsthand experience of how to use Phocas in this mergers and acquisition process. So I'm looking forward to hearing his take and understanding of how to use Phocas in this. So Phocas at a glance, we provide a company-wide solution for Infor users to really help companies feel good about their data. There is so much data out there, and being able to wrangle it all into a single place to be able to give you a view of your business is really important to us. We've got over 20 years of experience working with distributors like you, and with the help of our partners at Central Data, we're able to offer this solution that has out-of-the-box dashboards and favorites and alerts, and we can certainly talk about that later on as well. Phocas has been top rated by users in our industry and analysts as well for our ease of use, the adoption internally, and our fantastic support team. Today we're going to talk about the common challenges that are experienced in mergers and acquisitions, how Phocas can be used to improve this due diligence process, and some KPI reviews that can be generated within Phocas itself. So with that, I'm going to hand this off to Nick, and Nick's going to walk through our agenda and his experience in this merger and acquisition process and how he used Phocas in his job.
Great. Well, thank you, Christine. Great to be here. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about, in my experiences, how we deployed Phocas when my former company to really do a much better job at doing the due diligence. So we, before Phocas, when we would look at an acquisition or look at the data, it was a time-consuming process. It was with an unfamiliar ERP. We always looked, to validate the numbers, and that really required a lot of time and effort spending with the seller and getting that information. So we had been Phocas users for a long time. So then about 5-6 years ago, we started thinking, well, why can't we just get all that data that we use every day in Phocas, bring it and when we're doing the due diligence process? And these challenges that are here on the board, it was time consuming before utilizing Phocas. And this was one of the big issues. It was a disruption to the seller's business because we would usually have to have a staff there to get the numbers that we needed, to validate. And then sometimes, owners didn't really want to have, their employees know that the business was potentially being sold. So there was that need for, trying to keep it private, but it was difficult when you, you showed up at an organization and your team was doing due diligence to kind of keep that quiet. And then, we would get a set of financial statements. Sometimes they would be certified and sometimes they weren't. So again, that process of having to really validate just the numbers on the financial statements was quite time consuming. And we had to get a lot of detailed reports from the sellers. And again, going back to that kind of disruption. So it was difficult, and to kind of get that validation. So once we started to use Phocas, not only were we able just to validate those numbers, we can really look just like behind those numbers. We can get to that transactional level. So when we're in analyzing things like sales or inventory, we were able to kind of look not just behind the high level numbers, but look at how those sales were created. We were able to look at customers and products and look and see if there was opportunities or synergies within our own organization when we were looking at this business to potentially acquire. So getting that transactional level information and looking at where the sales came from, how was sales generated? In distribution, there's different ways of delivering sales, and we would be able to look and see, were these sales delivered via, were they delivered? Was it a walk-in business? Was there direct selling going on? We can really break that sales category out and look at the customer segmentation and how the customers were segmented and how they were classified, and understand how revenue really was generated in business, as opposed to just validating a top level number. And then actually getting down into things like looking at gross margin by product category or by customer. We had all that data that we would look at every day in our current business, but now we're looking at that at the company that we're doing the due diligence on. And then the biggest thing was, once we had that data in Phocas, we no longer had to be on site. All this analytical information, all this analysis could all be done off-site, and we can engage more of our team in the due diligence process. So if we were looking at sales and inventory or vendors, we would use our own team of managers to kind of evaluate that information. And through that, we were able to look at those synergies that could be potential that we wouldn't normally see if we were just kind of looking at that high level number. So we did bring our organization into the process. And again, now this information, because it was in Phocas, it was now being updated every day. So we can now actually look at this customers or this potential acquisition information on a daily basis. And then we can share that information to these key stakeholders in our organization. And then the other process is we no longer had to learn their ERP system. Because all that data that we analyzed was all in Phocas now. So the information was updated, timely. We would reduce the dependence on the seller's team to get us information, which again was a struggle at times. I'm sure if any of you have done acquisitions, engaging the business you're acquiring's team to get the information could be difficult, time consuming, and again, you're no longer keeping it really a secret. Everyone kind of knows that you're there and they know that you're doing this evaluation. So we get to leverage our team to do the due diligence, but also you could do due diligence on multiple potential acquisitions because all the information was in Phocas. So often we would be looking at two companies at the same time, where in the past we just did not have the resources to do that type of due diligence simultaneously. So with having the data, in this Phocas environment, being able to share it within our organization, we were able to look at multiple companies at the same time, which really allowed us to grow much faster because we could really get to the due diligence in a much shorter time period. When normally it might take 90 days for us to do a validation of numbers, we were able to get that process down to about a 30-day window where we were really knew what the business was, knew the business's numbers, were comfortable with it, and at that point, make our decisions on whether to move forward or not. So,
Nick, you bring up some great points about these acquisitions, and I've been in the middle of acquisitions in a previous job that I had, and I certainly know that going into a company that you're looking to acquire, it just brings up some angst, right? people are wondering what all of these companies are doing, right? And what are all these people doing here? Why are they here? And then you start asking questions and it just brings up in all kinds of angst. But you bring up a great point that this also saves you guys money. Not just money though, but time, because you're not sending a group of people to a company to do this due diligence. So there's travel time, there's the travel cost as well. So one, being able to get to the information really quickly, but also saving you guys time and money, right?
Yeah, and just on the process, Christine, it was really simple. I mean, when you're looking at a potential company, one of the first issues that ownership will have, that's selling the business is like they don't want their business to be disrupted, and we would offer them a solution to that. Now, again, I'm not going to say it wasn't an easy conversation to go to a business and say, listen, we want access to your ERP system because we want to export that data, into our Phocas platform. And there were times challenge, but when you can present to that group that, listen, we're not going to be on site for almost any time. We're going to do this due diligence all remotely. Your staff can go about their business, running their day-to-day, and we'll just be doing our analysis behind the scenes. Often, that was one of the key kind of things that helped us with the acquisition process and getting customers or potential acquisition companies comfortable, was ensuring them that once we were able to get that kind of link and access to their ERP system, and we could extract the data, and maybe that meant engaging one person in their organization. Once that was done, that company now is no longer, dependent on their team to supply the information. And that takes a lot of emotion out of it also, because now we're just really looking at the data and the information and making our decisions based on that, and not having to kind of get anybody's kind of emotional feelings about that. So it was really helpful in selling, this process to the selling company, to the company we were acquiring, that we're going to be able to do this due diligence without being disruptive. And then all the benefits of getting that, focus level transactional data and building out those databases and having them updated each night to us to really understand the business. And I think that was the key thing, is when we acquired a business, we understood that business. We understood a lot more than if we had just done our traditional type of due diligence. And some of the things that we uncovered, and I'll give you a couple of examples of things. One of the things we would often look at is customers and gross margin. And there's almost in every instance when we looked at a company and did this kind of analysis, we would see opportunities to improve gross margin and profitability day one by identifying some of those customers that were maybe being priced inappropriately for the type of customer they were. So we looked at one organization and we saw that there was about $10 to $15 million of revenue that was made up from smaller customers with very small transactional costs, because we could look at their average sales per transaction. And we looked at their margin and saw it was aligning with many of their larger customers. So in our world, we were like, well, if we can just reclassify these customers after acquisition, move their margin up a couple of points, which really wasn't going to impact them, there would be an enormous upside. So we did that, and in the course of a year, we moved those customers up 3-4 percentage points and looked at a $300,000 to $500,000 pickup in gross profit in that first year without any loss of revenue, because we were able to identify that and pull that out of their database. And we were able to kind of create pricing structures that were more aligned with how we went to market, and we identified opportunities like that. So that essentially was bringing down our purchase price, considerably, when we're able to identify and act quickly on that information.
So I've heard you talk about those things that you looked at before the acquisition and how those things, those KPIs that you were looking at impacted your purchase price. Can you talk a little bit about that and what
Sure.
you looked at and how that helped with your negotiation in a purchase, or how it even helped you decide that you weren't going to purchase?
But that's happened in both situations. One situation, especially during the COVID time, when businesses were suffering, supply chain issues. There was a business that we were looking at, and we were analyzing their assets, and we were looking at their inventories and their inventory KPIs. And we saw that a lot of their inventory turns overall where the market should be. But then when we looked at the line items, we saw that some of their higher, valued items, or their items that they were high value in their total revenue, their inventory turns were really way too high. And that was because they couldn't get the product. So now as we're negotiating and we're getting closer to that end of the deal, we're looking at doing a working capital calculation. And we understand that their inventory is probably 30–40% lower than it needed to be once, the supply chain issues were resolved. So we went into a negotiation and said, listen, we're going to have to reduce purchase price by a certain amount because of this. And we showed them the data. And we were like, listen, these inventory levels need to be brought up to here where they were historically. They're not there now. So that's because there just wasn't any issue other than the supply chain. But we said, once this is back, we're going to need to refill, your inventory. We're going to need to get paid for that or reduce the purchase price, at the time of contract. And we were able to negotiate that only because we were able to actually show them that data. And it was indisputable. So it wasn't like we were kind of assuming things. We can go right down to the line items of each one of those kind of products in that product category and saw where they were, under, where their inventory level was too low. And again, worked that into a working capital calculation at close that really helped, again, reduce the purchase price. Something that we may not have seen if we were just looking at traditional inventory KPIs as a whole. It was only because we were able to look at them at that SKU level to determine where the opportunities were or where the risks were in this case.
And that kind of goes back to that unemotional piece as well, right? People that are selling their business think very highly of their business, but you can go back and say, hey, look at these numbers. They are what they are. They came from your system, and here's what we're seeing. And here's why we need to negotiate this price, right?
And that's really, again, a lot of these businesses aren't maybe utilizing a tool like Phocas. So they really don't even understand their business as well as we will in literally a 2 to 3 week period, because our experts in our organization are looking at that business as if it's already, being owned and operated by us. So we would look at that team would literally look at that and say, this is what we would do. This is what we would normally do because we have that information. So once you go to close, you really know where your opportunities are. You've already identified your risks, and you determine whether those risks are worth taking on, or in some cases where, those risks aren't worth it and you need to walk away from the deal. Especially when it comes to one of the things that people sometimes miss in this is like looking at that dependency of certain employees, especially when it comes to kind of revenue producing staff. If we'll look, because again, we'll have the information to see, is there a salesperson dependency? Is there someone who we really need to make sure prior to close that we have a proper, arrangement with them? Because the last thing you want to do is, acquire a business and not understand who the key personnel is who are in that business, and make sure that you understand what their role is, especially if it's in a revenue or customer facing position, and make sure that you've had the appropriate conversations or the appropriate kind of contracts or legal work to make sure that those people are going to still be involved in the business. And sometimes if that can't happen, that could be a deal breaker. So it's again, things that we, in our prior to Phocas, we wouldn't get to that level of detail without a lot of effort and a lot of time to get there. Now that data is really right in front of you, almost within a couple of days, you know. So those are the kind of things that when I say looking beyond the financial information, you're really looking at the business as if it's already yours, and you're treating it like that, and you're making those decisions based on your KPIs that you run your business on every day.
And I remember a scenario that you gave that kind of stuck with me a bit is, you know, you could look at historical financial statements and see that sales are growing. But are sales growing because sales are truly growing? Or is it because there was a price change somewhere along the way? Can you talk a little bit about how you use Phocas to be able to identify this? Are my revenues really increasing, or my quantity is falling off, but the price, I just did a price increase? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I just find that to be fascinating.
Sure, because now everybody is probably, you know, experiencing inflation or has gone through it in the last couple of years. So again, how do you evaluate a business that's revenue is just, you know, going up, and what's the cause of that revenue? Is it price increases? Well, now you get to look at that sales not just from a dollar perspective. You're looking at quantities and average sell price, and in many cases you can now determine what the impact of inflation was on this business's top line and their profitability. Because again, you can look historically, and then you can look and say, hey, they're really not growing in really in sales. They're just experiencing the benefits of inflation, especially if you're looking at acquisitions that are commodity driven, which is what, you know, in my previous, you know, company, our businesses were selling in that commodities. So be able to look at a business and not look at this top line dollars, but look at units sold, look at the average sale price for those units, and really chart very easily that this is why it's going up. You know, prices have gone up 200, 300, 400%. And really, you know, that could affect the top line, of course, in revenue, but units might be flat, or units might even be down. And now when you're doing your evaluation, you can back that inflation factor out. Again, it's quick. You know, you can build that KPI quickly with Phocas because you have that line level detail. So this was not like a complex, you know, formula or time, you know, consuming process. You can create that pretty quickly in Phocas because you have all that data right there. So that allows, again, when evaluating a business, you know, to if it's based on you know, just your top line sales and profitability and some kind of multiple, now you can actually go back to the, you know, to the seller and get down to a more realistic pre-inflation number, and lay out to them, this is how much of your business is being impacted by inflation. And it's not, again, it's not emotional. It's not like, well, I think it's 30% or I think it's 40%. You know, you could actually quantify it, you know, much more realistically than that, because again, you're just looking at the data.
I would bet it changed the conversation for the group of folks that were looking at these acquisitions, right? It's no longer, you know, making assumptions. It's looking at data and being able to have this conversation about whether it was a good acquisition or not, right?
Of course, and then also you're able to, because of the ability to bring in, you know, multiple different, you know, data streams. You know, when we were looking at businesses where there was a real synergy, we actually bring that potential acquisitions database into our Phocas environment, and we can actually compare it to our actual data, especially if it was in a like business, because we could bring both those data streams in and really look at comparisons real easily, because of that ability to have that multiple, you know, sources of data kind of in that Phocas environment. So it does change the conversation completely when you're looking to negotiate, when you're really looking at a level of detail that probably the seller doesn't even know. And in some cases, you know, sellers would look at that and you be quite shocked by some of the results that we would find, and then we would use that obviously to help with the valuation and the purchase price.
Can you put it into perspective how many acquisitions you guys would do in a year?
Especially in the last 3 years, when I was at Trade Supply Group, we did 7 acquisitions in a 3-year period. Now we looked at probably 24 potentials and ended up closing on about 7 of them. So it gave us the ability to really look through multiple deals at the same time, like I said earlier, because we didn't have to just take out one, spend 90 days, and then decide it was a no-go, and then have to start the process over again. So we did a really quick turnaround in the acquisition. So what we acquired, and then also again what we just decided was wasn't worth it. So we were always in the last 3 to 4 years looking at multiple companies at the same time for acquisition. So it allowed us to really hone in on be specific on what we wanted, and then the things that weren't worth it we were able to discard.
So we have talked an awful lot about what you did before an acquisition. Talk a little bit about what you did once you've acquired this company and how using a tool like this helped with that as well.
Sure. Well, the nicest thing is, that's been a big benefit is the budgeting feature in Phocas, because as we were doing the due diligence and getting close to the close, we were actually building out a budget. We were building out a driver-based budget from a totally different ERP system within the Phocas environment. And again, that's a big thing when you're looking at for stakeholders. They want to see a projection. They want to see a budget. They want to see a 2-3 year projection. And when you get to use kind of the budgeting tool in Phocas to kind of do that budget, that's at a real detailed level, and you're pulling in actual data. It's very powerful to do that. So it allowed us to, after acquisition, to start really building out the budget in a consistent template that we've been using. So no more of the multiple Excel spreadsheets for the budget. We were all doing that in the Phocas environment. But then and again, not only did we kind of close 7 acquisitions, we did 7 system conversions because we were converted to our ERP system. So we would be able to use Phocas to help scrub that data and kind of get it ready for the integration into our ERP platform. So that was another added benefit, because again, the people that were responsible for those areas of the business can look at the data they needed to look at in a way that they were familiar with. And then they could actually kind of help with that integration of it by getting that data ready to be integrated into our system was Eclipse, to use that into our ERP environment. So that was a big benefit.
And so I just heard a couple things that were very interesting to me. One, even as you close that business, that you're going to go ahead and acquire this company, you've got the ability to start working on the budget so that even the day of closing, you're already working on a budget and adding some value to it straight away, right?
Well, correct. So we could bring that budget in. And that was real important, because after acquisition, stakeholders would want to know what the 3, 4, 5 year plan was, but you could actually start building out those scenarios, just prior to even the close. Once you kind of knew that was happening, the finance team is already working on the budget, and that budget now is incorporated into our Phocas environment, and it's merged with the budgets that we already have created. So now we're looking already at a budget for a company that we just acquired, and we're building, and that's already accessible to us, in our Phocas environment.
That's brilliant. And the other part that I found The other part that I find really intriguing is you acquire this company and they're on another system, right? So you're not required on day one to start migrating them to a new system. You can still connect into that system that you purchased and still have visibility into this data and all of the KPIs associated with their business while you work on integrating and getting them into the platform that you guys use. So there's this continuity that still happens, right?
That's correct, because now, you don't have to do that disruptive change into the ERP conversion, but because usually, the issue with that is you have to learn that new ERP to get the reporting or the information you want, but now you don't have to worry about that. So now you can do all your analytics, in Phocas, and the business can run on their ERP till it's ready to be, migrated over. There isn't that rush because you're getting the data. And then what's key is that when you do the migration, you don't have to worry about bringing the historical data over. That's one of the things when people move, migrate to into one ERP into the other. Where does the historical data go? Well, here we bring the historical data right into Phocas, and then once that got migrated to our ERP, those systems merged. So we had historical data, that we were able to look at. And normally, I don't know if people on the call have done systems conversions. Often it's either really difficult or almost impossible to bring back, the historical data into the ERP that you're migrating into. But here at Phocas, we would keep that data there, and then once it got migrated onto our ERP, we would bring the two databases together, and now you had historical information, whether it's sales, inventory, purchases, general ledger, all that now, all that historical data is all accessible, which was huge for us, to be able to have that.
And I would assume that based on this purchasing information and looking at the purchases that you guys made at your company, maybe there was some synergies there with those vendors. And was there an opportunity for you to negotiate better pricing with those vendors because of this acquisition?
Like I said, I talked earlier about taking during that due diligence, bringing that database into our Phocas environment. So now, for example, my purchasing manager could look at a vendor and see, oh, I'm buying from that vendor, or I'm not buying from that vendor, and see if there's an opportunity. He's literally looking at it side by side, in his Phocas environment. So we could actually see if there's opportunities for us to purchase better, consolidate vendors, or even in some instances, see new vendors that maybe would help our existing businesses. So that was really key, from, again, being able to leverage our relationships. And sometimes, if it's even, sometimes you would see customers that were also in our customer database that were maybe buying different products or have opportunities to cross-sell. And that was another, again, things you wouldn't normally uncover until maybe you were in that business for a while. But again, if you're looking at a customer database and you see customers that are also in yours, and you may see opportunities to cross-sell or, provide better opportunities for them to get, more of their sales wallet, into the company, that's an opportunity. But again, you might uncover that once you've, acquired the business and you're in it for a while. But again, now, that's day one, that's opportunities, that's things that you're able to identify, and go after immediately.
That is just brilliant.
Yeah, it's really, again, go back to, it's really you by you're looking at data like that, you really understand the business. It's not just the numbers, check the boxes for evaluation, and it meets the financing requirements if you have those. You really kind of get into the business, you understand it. You understand how the business operates. So that's a huge opportunity, and a learning curve is really now reduced. You're not waiting a year or two to understand the business. You're in there. You're understanding how it works.
So would you say that you saw a remarkable difference between the acquisitions that were made before using a tool like this and those afterwards with using that tool?
Yes. The issue of resources kind of went away. We didn't have to, because that was always, the issue, right? You're going into this acquisition and it's like, oh, I got to deploy a team and they're not going to have their day job while they're doing this and things are going to fall through the cracks. That kind of went away a little bit. That question was, we were always ready to look at a business to evaluate it. Because, the team would have this, our process was to get everything, into focus right away. So again, you're not having that human capital that's required. That resource now is gets to be leveraged much more, in your organization. So that allowed us why in the last few years, when I was at, Trade Supply, we were able to kind of accelerate the acquisitions. We were comfortable with the data. There was that non-emotional, element to it now. That went away. And we were able to get very granular very quickly, in the business, and identify right off the bat. Usually, I said within 30 days whether we thought the acquisition was a go or a no-go. So you were able to again look at many more potential acquisitions as opposed to kind of going through a process that was much slower. And so we definitely was a huge benefit for us, to be able to do that.
Amazing. Thank you for all of that information. That was really helpful. So let's keep going. I want to talk a little bit about Phocas. And Phocas at its core began with analytics and being able to pull information from ERPs, but then not just ERPs. Phocas has the ability to bring in other pieces of data. So Nick has talked an awful lot about bringing in ERP data. I've heard of our customers that bring in call detail records. They bring in CRM data. They marry all of that up with sales to see how much time they spend on the phone with customers that never buy. Or on the flip side, how much time don't they spend with their largest customers? So this analytics piece isn't limited to just ERP. It could be any data whatsoever. I'll give you a perfect example. My start at Phocas, they gave me a demo instance and said, build your own database. And I am not a database person. I'm not a technical person, but I was able to bring in pretty simplistic data. I live in Montana, so I brought in my electric bill for the year. I brought in the weather for the year, and I had a super simple database that showed the obvious, right? When the temperature goes down, my electric bill goes up. So Phocas at its core began as an analytics tool. Our customers came to us and said, hey, you guys have all of this great data. You have all of our general ledger transactions. Why can't we do financial statements with you? So working with our partners like Central Data, with our customers and our development team, we build a financial statement tool that allows you to create multiple versions of financial statements. They all have the same bottom line, but maybe you've got a financial statement that you want to send to bankers that have a whole lot of KPIs, or you're looking to be acquired and you want to have financial statements with certain things on it, or maybe you just want a simplified one. We've given you the ability to create these financial statements and create multiple versions of them. And then our customers came back to us again and said, hey, we've got these financial statements, you've got all of our data. We would love to be able to use this tool for budgeting. Excel, everybody that I know back in the day used to use Excel for budgeting, and there was an administrator that would get all of these Excel files and merge them all together. We'd like to be able to use a tool that is interactive, that people can create budgets based on financial statements, based on the data that we've got sitting out there on the Phocas tool. So again, working with our partners, our developers, our customers, we built a budgeting and forecasting tool, which really gives this company-wide financial planning, analysis, and reporting tool all in one place. So if we were to look at the Phocas products overall, we've got at our core the analytics piece. Layered on top of that is financial statements, and then layered on top of that is the budgeting and forecasting piece as well. So I want to jump into some questions. If anybody has any questions, there is a Q&A section of the webinar, so feel free to put some questions in there. I see there's a couple out there, Nick, so we're going to go some fast and furious questions here. The first one, can you explain how Phocas integrates quickly with a company's data?
Sure. I think you touched on that earlier in your personal experience. Yeah, the ability to, once you're able to extract the data out, to be able to build the databases literally takes, in our case, it took a day, maybe two, to bring the data in and to validate it. Because we would bring in the, from the previous ERP, all we needed to know was how to extract the data. So we probably, at Trade Supply Group, we probably had built out Phocas on 10 or 15 different ERP systems. Some were homegrown that no one ever heard of, and some were, more of the well-known ones. But again, that time was pretty quick because you knew exactly what you needed to bring out once you could extract the data using the Phocas, database design tool, which is pretty simple to use. You can build it out very quickly.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but you use the Phocas sync tool, right? And that sync
Correct.
tool is what, it's literally what it's described as. It's sync. It synchronizes that data between the ERP and the Phocas system. And it's scheduled, right? So once sync is installed and that flow of data happens, you say, hey, every night at midnight, I want the data to update. And then even after that acquisition, that sync is still happening. So there's that continuity of business that happens. You acquire the company and the data is still syncing, right?
Right. So that sync allowed us, to create a daily, a daily report on that potential acquisitions business. So again, that sync allowed all the databases to get updated, each night, just like they did it in our, in our existing business. And we were able to bring kind of like these dashboards for stakeholders to see how that process of the acquisition was coming along. So between the database designer and the sync, your data was available, each day and being updated.
And you've got another question. I'm not sure that we can do this, and I'm going to leave this one up to you. This person has asked, first they said that they appreciate you explaining the key M&A items that you looked at when you were going through the process. And they want to know if you could show us in Phocas some examples in Phocas itself. I'm not sure if you've got anything up that you'd be willing to share, if we can do that at a later time.
I don't have anything up right now that I could share with someone, on that, but like I said, if they wanted to reach, I could definitely provide some things for them, to take a look at.
Sure thing. And then the next question was, is there a demo of how to use Phocas once you have the data into the system in this webinar? So we didn't plan on doing a demonstration of this. And I'll actually take it to this next page here. If you want to see a demo, talk with Nick again about how he used this, please reach out to Shane. Shane's email address is up here on our screen. Shane can certainly navigate the waters with Central Data and Phocas to be able to provide a demonstration. The folks at Central Data are excellent at using Phocas and showing how you can do this. If you wanted to have a conversation with Nick, we're certainly happy to do that as well.